So welcome to this presentation, and thanks for joining me for our presentation on pie preparation. I promise I will try to keep the pie puns to a tasteful minimum. So just to give you an overview, our ingredients list here, the main topics we're going to be covering in this presentation are the pie format, and we're going to be using this to formulate a study plan for ourselves, along with how our pie exams compare to open book exams and how they utilize our MT skills. We'll go over pie theory, the first half of the exam, which mainly concerns how we're going to review course material and come up with research systems to use during the exam. And finally, we're going to go over pie dictations, in which we'll go over how to use your report history in Dictoscribe and create some handy references for yourself. A couple notes I should mention. I'm not going to be using exam questions as examples. Sorry, I can't. I can use sort of general examples, but not anything specific. I will, at the end, include a list of websites and other webinars I think will be helpful for studying, especially for anything topical or specific. And this is also going to be a question period, hopefully. We should have time for that. So I'll try to keep an eye on chats as we go along, but if I do miss your question, you can save it for the end period, and I'll take more questions then. So, the basics. These are just going to be some oldie but goldie advice tidbits for studying for exams, but also for studying for online open book exams specifically, and also going over the pie format so we can create our study plan. So one of the main things that I think a lot of people get misled by when it comes to online open book exams is this idea that you're not going to have to study. And that's not necessarily the case. You can't really rely on having enough time to reread course information in full or learn key concepts on the fly during the exam. So it's really best to go over the course material before taking the exam. You can't rely on pre-prepared test answers, so don't try and make any that you plan to use. Like, these can be good for practice, but they're not necessarily what you're going to find when you get to the exam. You do want to prepare your reference materials so that you can find information really nice and quickly and easily during the exam, which we're going to go over in our theory section. And lastly, there are still kind of time constraints, not really, you have 48 hours to do the exam, but you might still be limited by the amount of usable time you have in there, right? So you want to kind of use that test format to plan your time accordingly. Our recipe for success for this is going to start with that exam plan, a structure, for our study and also for actually doing the test. Then we can go over course material to make sure we have a solid foundation of knowledge and understanding, what we're going to call our knowledge base. From there, we're going to create research systems of organized notes and systematic methods of finding content quickly for the theory portion, along with some handy resources, what we want to have within easy reach for both portions of the exam. To give you an idea of the guiding principles behind our exams, I just want to quickly describe what makes open book exams different from other ones and explain how our pies utilize the main MT skills you're acquiring during the program. Open book exams focus on synthesis, analysis, and application of knowledge rather than just rote memorization. For us, this means being able to analyze the question and use our research skills to find references that we can apply to the question. So these types of questions will require some higher order thinking skills, which you may have already encountered in some of your chapter tests where questions can almost seem misleading. We're not trying to trick you or pose trick questions. What we're trying to assess is whether or not you understand the material rather than just being able to look it up. Obviously, we aren't expecting the same level of knowledge a doctor has of medical concepts, but we do need to see that you have the skills to know which words belong in the context of a given sentence, because this is going to really help you when it comes to picking out errors in reports, especially with things like homonyms or sound-alike words. That contextual thinking will make those sort of things stick out like a sore thumb. Lastly, this familiarity with the course material means you'll be able to hear it better in your reports as well. So the PI format has two main components. There's the theory portion that is going to have a series of multiple choice, true or false, matching, and fill in the blanks type of questions. There's a range. For the first PI, we have around 45 questions, about 60 on the second, then closer to 90 on the third. So the difficulty level does ramp up with each exam. The dictation portion comprises 4 dictations of about 1 to 5 minutes long. They also increase in difficulty with each PI, but hopefully as you're going along in the program, so is your competency level. So the time should still kind of track as you go along and get better and get more familiar with your material and resources. We say that exam typically takes 5 hours to complete, but I like to plan for at least 6, just to give some cushion room and kind of breaks this up nice and neatly. It'll give you 2 hours for the theory portion and 4 hours for dictations. So that kind of breaks down to, you can use the first hour to answer all the questions in the theory portion and maybe even give yourself a little break, come back and review everything to make sure you're really nice and confident before submitting the exam. And then between that and the theory, you could take a little break. You could use even like a first pass, listen to all the dictations and then go take a little break for yourself and come back and start diving into typing them. But this format will give you about an hour per dictation, which for a 1 to 5 minute dictation should be a good amount of room. So you've probably seen a bunch of these before, and there's a reason that they're the standbys. You want to get a good night's rest because that will just give you a nice clear mind to work with. It also helps with memory consolidation, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, but basically every night your brain is taking in all the information you've stored and organizing it and getting rid of the fluff and just making it easier for you to access this information in the morning. So get some good sleep. Eating a light, healthy meal an hour before gives you enough time to digest and, have your blood sugar levels in nice zones and, just be in a good place for having some nice clean fuel to burn for your exam. We also recommend having some healthy snacks on hand just in case you are getting a little low blood sugar and you need a little boost for that. Water is also really good to have on hand. Keep your mind lubricated. It's a good idea to prepare your exam taking area so that it's nice and clean and organized and everything you need is on hand. For the procrastinators among us, please don't let this become your entire exam prep. I'm speaking from experience. Save the cleaning for after you've done enough studying and you're using that to prepare for the exam. Set aside some quiet distraction-free time. I'll go into a bit more of this in a bit. And lastly, avoid going on social media or talking with anxious or negative students right before your exam or the day of. It's great to have study buddies and people you can reach out to through social media, especially if they're in the course, but you also really don't want to let someone else's negativity become your problem, because you are you. Other students have their own issues and problems and hurdles to overcome, and you don't want that to become your world. It's great to sympathize with these things at other times, but when you're trying to prepare yourself mentally for an exam, you want to be in a nice, positive state of mind. So also, social media can just be a bit of a black hole for time, so it's a good idea to just save it for after the test. Scheduling distraction-free time can be a bit of a hurdle. You ideally want to have 6 hours. So if you have kids, see if you can arrange a time for someone else to look after them. If you can get them out of the house, that is really ideal, because we all know that if something can go wrong with kids, it will, and it's going to be at the worst time possible. So you want to tell the people you live with that this, what day you're taking the exam, and be really clear that you need this time to be quiet and interruption-free. You want them to basically treat you as if you are sleeping and, I don't know, really sick or something, so they shouldn't bother you unless the house is actually on fire. Something terrible's happened. Lastly, it can be a really good idea to try and arrange a backup plan in case something goes wrong during your planned time. So, if you have the kids arranged to be looked after one day, if you can have someone on hand for the day after, maybe to take them off your hands for a bit, or if there's a time someone can help you with that, it's good to set this up, because you could come to your arranged test date and the power goes out, or your computer decides to go on the fritz that day, or some other emergency happens. You go to drop the kids off and one of them's horribly sick, or the babysitter is. So having some sort of plan B lined up will just take some stress off your mind and give you some peace of mind for the day of. Even if you don't end up using that backup plan, just knowing you have it might just really make you feel better about doing your test that day. So when it comes to the notes, before we get into theory, I just want to go over some pros and cons of paper versus digital notes. With paper, some ideas to think about are that they're very flexible in how you can organize, arrange, and design them. If you like using colored highlighters or pens, that can be kind of a fun part of test prep. You don't need to wait for paper to load, so it's really nice and accessible. You can also use a sideboard or side table near your computer and see things at a glance, so it kind of works as a second monitor that doesn't conflict with your computer screen. On the other hand, digital notes, obviously you can store a lot more information in there. You can search that content a lot easier with search functions. A lot of programs will let you link content across formats, or you can even just drop in some hyperlinks. Word or OneNote will let you do that. And you can also update things a lot quicker with digital, because with paper you have the issue of having it printed out, right? I find in this course a mix of the two is really, really ideal. Something like the account specifics I have, or the punctuation guide, I have some really easy one-page references that I can just scan and find things. But if I want to look up the actual rule itself, I have a document that I can search and find that. I also have the pages bookmarked because I'm that type that I like to have a few backups. So yeah, anything like that you can kind of double up. Paper is great for handy glance references, and then digital content, you can really use the power of the search function with those and come out with a best of both worlds approach to your notes. So, delving into theory, now that we've covered the basics. The main thing with the theory is that you want to review your course material to make sure you have that solid knowledge foundation and understanding to work from. And really, a lot of this is also just knowing where things are so that you can find them really quick is really going to help you during the exam. To start with, we want to understand what's expected of us on this exam and what the framework is going to be. That's going to help us plan a little bit better. We covered this a little bit with the Pi format, and this information is available in your course content under the Pi preparation section of the course, and it's repeated for each Pi so that you can find it really nice and easily, but I just want to go over some key points so that they're here. So, when will you have access to the exam? Once you complete the preceding chapters. That's going to be sensory for Pi 1, electronic health records for Pi 2, or the practicum for Pi 3. And a lot of this stuff actually also applies to the practicum exam. You're just going to be looking at fluency instead of dictoscribe. How much time do you have to write the exam? 48 hours. You can take breaks. The questions will be multiple choice, true or false, matching, fill in the blanks. You have the full course material, online course material, the resources that come with the course like Stedman's Online and the Vital Source books, and also the wide sea of Google to refer to through the theory portion. And if you do need to ask for clarification, the calls and chats are going to be the easiest way to get a hold of instructors in the minute, like, immediately. We can't give specific answers to specific questions, but we can give you some general help and try and clear up anything that you're wondering about. If it is after hours, we will try and get back through email, but again, you obviously, it's good to plan taking a good portion of that during the 48 hours, having that when you can get a hold of us quickly and easily. So the best place for us to start working on theory study preparation is going to go basically go through each chapter that you've covered so far in the course and identify your weak and strong areas. We can get a sense of which chapters were our best and worst subjects by just making a simple list of each chapter covered so far and the chapter test scores from each. You can look at chapter exercises and see how many attempts they took to hit 100%, or just give them a difficulty rating. Even if you did 100% the first time, maybe it took you really long or you found it real strain, so you can give it a lower rating. You can also look at your instructor grade reports to identify which specialties you had more difficulty with in transcriptions. We're going to be using that list later on in dictations as well, so this list will pull double study duty for us. And with that, you can identify where you want to spend more of your study time. It's a good idea to maybe highlight the 3 weakest and 3 strongest chapters that you find, and even, maybe a couple medium ones that you want to focus more time on, just so that you can prioritize how you do your review. A lot of us, might have the tendency to look over the stuff we enjoy looking at, and that's often the material that we don't need to review as much. So if looking at a chapter makes you groan a little bit inside, then that's probably the one we should start with, because the stuff that we find hard is the stuff we don't like, right? But the more familiar you get, the easier it gets, and sometimes something you dislike at first becomes something you really enjoy later on. It just might take a little bit more understanding and facility with the material. So those course, the chapter requirements that we give in each chapter, that nice list that we print out, is a good way for us to dive in a little bit deeper and assess which specific areas in each chapter gave us difficulties. So we can take the list of chapters that we had from before and fill in topics that were covered in each one. You can either do this with just the ones you find you have trouble with, or you can put all of them and make a sort of table of contents of the course materials by chapter and by topic, which will be really useful for searching for things later on, and organizing your notes and doing review and creating a reference system. So yeah, one thing I will say is it's a good idea to keep all the chapter material together, and just because later on when you actually go to write the exam, it will be really nice and easy if all your notes follow the same kind of formatting as the course. You can, if you're using paper notes or even digital, you can move stuff around to put the chapters you have more difficult first, but it's a good idea to have them so that you can put them back in order later on. So just taking an example from the pharmacology chapter, this is the chapter requirements, not all of them, obviously. There's no way I could fit this into a presentation slide and have you guys still be able to read it. So this is just a simple list, and I just went through and highlighted some things that you know, I was looking at and going, oh, pharmacokinetics, do I have an easy definition for that? Could I describe that to someone if they asked me what that meant off the top of my head, or would I have to refer to it? Drug preparations, do I know all of these really well, or will I want a little list of them? Combo medications can give a lot of people trouble. So the nice thing about these chapter requirement pages is you can kind of go through each item and go, okay, well, the intro text was pretty simple. Drug nomenclature, yeah, I have a pretty good understanding of that basic. Drug sources, yeah, I think I understand classes pretty well. But you can kind of just go through and highlight anything that you think you're going to need to spend a bit more time on. But keep the whole list as a table of contents for yourself as well. So when we're preparing our study notes, like I said before, you can use the strong weak list that you made before to just bring some of those chapters you want to spend more time on to the front, keeping everything all nice and together, and then take those highlighted topics with notes and fill in as much from the course content as you think you're going to need. You can go in and highlight any terms that you don't know off the bat and look those up and fill in that information as well. Anything you don't fully understand, having this nice thing of like document with highlights also will not just help you researching things and trying to fill in as much as you can, but you can also use it to reach out to the instruction team and ask us for clarification on anything that's fuzzy or not well understood. I like to use a digital notebook like OneNote. I really like all the tabs that you can use to organize information, and it has a search function. You can also just use Word documents by chapter as well, or one big one with a lot of sub-subjects, which can slow down the computer a little bit, so it depends on which one you find usable or which system you find works best for you. Once we have all these notes kind of collated together, we can go beyond just reading through the notes and reviewing it and actually work on doing a little bit of practice. So some ways we can do this are to think of some potential questions or pull some from chapter tests and quizzes. Again, you don't want to try and do this with the intention of having them ready for the exam, but more with the intention of using them to make sure that you can find information very quickly in your notes and the system you have set up, or with your other resources like the VitalSource books or the Stedman's Online. So you're looking at testing your ability to retrieve information rather than have sort of formulae of answers to look from as much. You can also use key terms to try and make some of your own questions. Look online for some practice ones. or create some flashcards of terms and definitions to practice matching. I know Quizlet.com has some good resources for you to create your own flashcards, which can be really useful. It can also be helpful to practice with a study buddy, if you can rope one into it. So if it's someone who's unfamiliar with medical terminology, use that unfamiliarity and try explaining to them what each specialty covers, what some of the key concepts are in a specialty, and see if they understand what you're saying. Because if you can explain it to someone who is outside of the field, that really tests your own knowledge of what you're talking about. If it's someone within the medical field, you can kind of get them to test you a little bit more if you give them a list of some of the specialties and subjects that you have trouble with, because their familiarity will mean that they will have a bit of an easier time actually quizzing you, asking for definitions or asking what conditions go with which systems and medications that go along with that and that kind of thing. If you know someone who's in the course, you could take some of your worst subjects and do a trade with them and try and come up with some practice questions for each other and quiz each other. So creating a research system is our last and probably most important step in the theory preparation. If you don't have time to review all the material, being familiar with where it is and having a system for finding it nice and quickly is going to be, really important for the exam. If you've already spent the time going over the course material and making table of contents, all you really need to do is put the chapters back in order as they appear in the course. From there, you can set up your test-taking space with some physical resources you want to have on hand. For this, there's an old quote that goes, "More isn't always better. Sometimes it's just more." And I think that really applies well here. The physical references I like to have on hand are sort of at-a-glance references, so a table of course contents by chapter, so I have an idea of where I need to look for specific answers, any vocabulary list, Latin combined forms, medication, or abbreviations lists that I've been making, so long as they're nice and simple and easy to read. Any BOSS references, Book of Style, list of the references that I think I might need for that. And with those on hand, I can use my digital notes and resources to look up specifics more quickly. But whatever the system you choose to use, try and make sure it's nice and simple and time effective. So using the course ebook, we send out that email saying don't use it for course material because there will sometimes be small details that get changed in the course content, and we can't update all the ebooks that we've already sent out whenever we do this. So it's not a bad tool to use, though, for searching for where information is, which is something I used in the course because I have the ebook, and I found it nice and easy to have it on my iPad and just use the search function in there using keywords to pull up where exactly in the course material was that I needed for the test, and then I could go in my course tree and pull that up nice and easy from there. So it's a great search engine, and it's also really, it can be a good tool to use for reviewing material if you like to, let's say, go over course material when you're getting ready for bed. I used to like pulling up chapters that I was having trouble with and just read them for a little bit before I went to sleep, which apparently if you do study certain things within, I think it's 4 hours before you sleep, you actually can take advantage of your memory consolidation a little bit more. I don't know how strong the evidence is on that, so, overall, any studying you're doing, as long as you're spacing out, giving yourself time and not cramming, is going to be the best thing. So if your time for doing that is early morning, don't stress out about trying to do it before bed. Yeah, whenever you can get it in is the best time to do it. So now that we've gone through expectations, course objectives, preparing notes, practicing, and developing a system for finding information, here's some tips for actually writing the exam. You want to plan how much time you're going to spend on each question. So that's going to depend on whether you want to do a first pass and then second pass, or if you're the type of person who just likes to do one single pass and you know, go through question by question that way. This is going to help you pace yourself while you're going through the exam. You might want to limit it to 1 or 2 minutes per question, or yeah, more or less, depending on how much time you've penciled in. If you get stuck, try putting in whatever you think is best just for the moment, and then make sure you remember to come back to it. So obviously this isn't a great thing for anyone who only does one pass. If you're that type of person, then you might still have an upper limit, and maybe you could just write down a sticky note, go back to question 16 at the end, because you don't want to, if you are the type that likes to do one straight ahead sort of question by question pass, you don't want to lose a ton of time getting stuck on one question. So it might be a good idea to have anything that you're really, really stuck on, just going back for those questions. So have a little sticky note that you can use for that. Each question you want to read and sort of break it down so that you understand what it's actually asking. I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this, but essentially you're looking for keywords and just making sure you understand what exactly what kind of information you're looking for. Finally, reviewing each answer to verify and fact check yourself is a great way to just, you know, make yourself feel more confident about your exam when you go to hit submit. So breaking down test questions. I kind of just grabbed a generic sort of thing without any examples, just to kind of pick out some of the keywords here. So in this example, we know we need to look up the generic version for the brand names, so that's going to mean our spelling and capitalization is going to be important for this. We also know that each answer is only going to be one word, so that's a nice clue that the question is giving us. And yeah, that's kind of a straightforward sort of thing. Let's say you have a question asking which symptoms are present with a certain condition with some multiple choice options. For that, you want to verify each of the options against the condition itself and pick the answer with the best options. So for that, you're looking for keywords, like I said, so that you can help break that down into simple components. You want to take the time to analyze each option before selecting anything with a multiple choice answer, and you want to take some time to refer to notes for anything you're not sure about. A lot of questions will just ask you to look up the definition of a term. Make sure you also verify some of the terms in the answers to make sure they match up with the definition that you're looking up, because it's not always going to be one-to-one. We don't just, you know, ask you to define a condition and pull it straight out of Stedman. Sometimes we will try and see if you understand by using words that mean the same thing but aren't exactly the same. And yeah, you can always check those against, you know, fact check yourself on any of these on your second pass if you're doing a review. So moving on to the dictation portion. Once your theory portion has been submitted, it's going to be auto-graded by the system, and that's going to open up the dictations. To prepare for these, the main resource we're going to utilize is going to be your instructor grade reports and other graded reports from DictoScribe, or also for the practicum, any reports that you've gotten back in there. So we can use these to make 3 lists of critical, major, and minor errors to help us spot patterns in our work. The critical errors are really going to help us with dangerous abbreviations, other abbreviations, medications, labs, stuff like that. The major lists are really going to help us with our account specifics, medical terminology, and listening skills, because the major English word errors usually point to some listening skills we need to develop. And the minor errors can help us mainly with grammar and punctuation, but also those small word errors can help fine-tune our listening ears even further. So when it comes to understanding the expectations for the dictations, by the time you're hitting the first PI, you should have a good basic understanding of what's expected in dictations at that point. You know, you want to see the report typed as fully as possible, using blanks for forwards or less when needed, and not an excessive amount of blanks in the report. And we want to see it formatted to the account specifics. So just a note on the priorities that you're using when it comes to your review. This line of work tends to attract very detail-oriented people, and one of the main issues we see is students prioritizing small details that they find bothersome over those bigger patterns in their work that are more important to address. So those 3 error categories from graded reports also can serve as a hierarchy of how you approach reviewing your work and preparing for your exam. You really want to address critical errors first. They're the most costly ones, right? Plenty of students will go down the comma or hyphen rabbit hole when the reports show a need for audio review or a better understanding of their account specifics, for example. We only deduct for each type of grammar or punctuation error once per type, and we use a list of 13 items for the punctuation. So that means even if you got every single punctuation error you possibly could, you're still looking at, maybe 4 points off your report. So compare that to the critical errors, and there are 3 points each one, and you really want to look at addressing those issues before you worry about the smaller ones, because there's a ceiling to how many punctuation and grammar errors you can get, but with the critical and major ones, the sky is the limit on those. When it comes to reviewing previous reports, we can use these to actually create multiple pathways in our brain of storing information. So don't underestimate the power of listening to the audio again. There's a reason why we suggest it over and over in the course, because it really is a powerful tool. Your brain takes in information both consciously and unconsciously. Your conscious system is what we tend to think of as critical thinking, analytical, the system that's capable of processing theory and paradigms and concepts. It's really slow, and it can only process a couple bits at a time because it's very expensive processing-wise. Your unconscious, on the other hand, takes in much more information and it does it much more quickly. Right now, your unconscious is processing millions of bits of information. The room that you're sitting in, all that information, your unconscious brain is keeping track of. So this system doesn't do well with analysis, but it is a powerhouse when it comes to the amount of info you're taking in. Whenever you're reviewing audio while reading along with the key, you're updating what I like to call your brain's speech recognition software. And on a conscious analytical level, you might notice, oh, I heard this word, but, you know, I heard this word differently, I heard that word differently, using that system. But unconsciously, your unconscious brain is listening to all the bits of information in that audio and taking in all the visual information as well. And that all those audio bits of information include things you're not thinking about, like whether or not the speaker is very sibilant, which means there's a lot of S's in their speaking, or shushy speakers that have a bit more H's, and how that affects the words they're saying. Speakers with accents, people who use very strong plosives, that like hard P, T, D sounds. All that little information gets stored in your subconscious, and you might not notice it, but if you're reviewing it, that is helping forge these pathways in your brain. All these idiosyncratic patterns of speech, like when people say or ah over and over in a report, you're assimilating that information. So this creates a lot of nice, like many pathways in your brain, kind of, and the more you're going over the same types of errors, it's like a kid walking through the snow. If they use the same path, then no matter how much snow falls, so extra information in this analogy, comes into the system, you're still reinforcing that pathway by going over it again and again, right? So that's going to help your unconscious brain kind of highlight things for your conscious brain to pay attention to when you're proofreading. And that's the way we can really, you know, utilize these two systems to their fullest extent. So I like tables because I'm that type of person. When breaking down errors, I like to use 3 different tables for critical, major, and minor, and I like to organize them by type. So I like to have a column with the error or difference that's in there. I like to put in some notes on how I can fix these errors and what the correct answer might be. And then I like to keep a tally of how many times I come across the same error, because what you can usually do with a lot of programs is highlight a row and move it up or down. So like the lab values down here, you can highlight that and move it ahead of the medication errors so that now I can prioritize this one a little bit more. And this is how we can kind of take our trouble spots and see them rise to the top. And also, over time, as you progress in the program, you can hopefully delete entire rows as, you know, HS and QHS just become second-hand nature to you to put in the right answer. When it comes to preparing these, we all have things that we tend to forget when it comes to our proofreading and the things we're doing in a report. Our previous reports are going to help us identify which of these areas we want the most help with come exam time. So starting with the critical categories, you can see if you need to work on dangerous abbreviations, other abbreviations, medications and dosing, or common labs with some normal ranges to help you out. Some of the major errors, you can make a list of account specifics, which, you know, they get easier as you go through the course, but I remember looking at those and just going, there's no way I'm going to remember all this. So I had to break them down and make an easy reference for myself and just keep referring to it over and over until, you know, like I said, with reinforcing those pathways, now if I see CC, even if someone is, you know, saying that they CC'd someone in an email, my brain just goes, hey, that's wrong, because I've reinforced that pathway so much at this point. Yeah, if you have some trouble with medical terminology and Latin combined forms, you can make a nice handy table of the ones that you tend to forget for that. Same with surgical terms and equipment, grammar and punctuation. You know, grammar is another fairly dry subject, so it can really help to have a list of the things that, the rules that just have a hard time sticking in your brain. They're going to be different for each student because we all have different, you know, peculiarities when it comes to which grammar rules we like and don't like and have an easier time remembering. You can also use these lists to identify how much work you need to do on your listening skills, because some of them, like the terminology, are things that you're going to want to review maybe a little bit more, or see if you can look up unfamiliar terms, more readily. So yeah, these are the lists that I like to call my forget-me-nots. They're a little bit different from the full list. Let's say like the dangerous abbreviations, you have that full list in the BOSS. I like to shorten that to the ones that I particularly have trouble with. So if you take that list from the BOSS and simplify it down to just the dangerous abbreviation and what it expands to, like HCTV and hydrochlorothiazide, you can make a much shorter list and hopefully something that just fits on one page that you can glance at. You can also put these into a text expander, which is really helpful. But it's also a good idea to have them on paper just in case, because some of them aren't easy to make expanders for, and sometimes expanders don't work. So it's good to have an idea of what to look out for. You can also put some abbreviations from past reports on the same page as your dangerous abbreviations if it'll all fit, or a separate page depending on what you need for your abbreviation forget-me-nots. For medications, I used to like to just pull the list in with each chapter that we give. This one is from endocrine, I believe, and you can simplify it down by just highlighting and taking out anything that you're familiar with. And come exam time, you can add in, some common dose ranges. You can put brands in an extra column and just have a nice handy list for those of the ones that you tend to have trouble with or that don't come up very often. I don't know if I've ever seen bromocriptine mesylate in a report, to be honest, in 5 years of working for many hospitals. So for lab panels, I had a lot of trouble with these as a student myself. I found it really necessary to have a list of all the panels with tests that you would normally find on them and some reasons why someone might have these panels. I took off some of my examples here just to be able to fit more of these on the screen, but you can see I pulled in the items that would go with it, some of the common abbreviations that go with that, and then some normal ranges for them. But you can make a more expanded list of this and then just have your forget-me-nots as a title page on that for a simpler version. For account specifics, you can grab the whole thing and then just take out a lot of information that until you have a nice shorter list, and then highlight anything that you have trouble with yourself. And that will make it really nice and easy to scan through as you're doing your proofreading phase in the exam. For medical terms in Latin combined forms, again, just pulling in that table and deleting items as they become familiar and easier for you to remember and use. You can also put this in with your other medical terminology tables. So rather than your full vocabulary list, this is just pulling out the stuff that you tend to forget and that comes up a lot in your area lists. For surgical terms, there's a PDF that I want to link in this webinar when it goes up on the forum that this is pulled from that has some basics, but also it can be helpful to just have a list of any terms that you've gotten errors for by specialty especially. So that's really handy to have during your proofreading phase. And then finally, using all of this information to help with your listening skills. You can use any of those lists by just reading them out loud and hearing whether or not you can pronounce the words on them. And if you can't, it's a good idea to look them up and see if you can hear someone else say them. You can use any of the words on your error lists from earlier and try and pronounce those, or like look up on YouTube. I used to like looking up medical terminology by specialty on YouTube because there's often a lot of great videos where you can hear people just talking about medical terms, and since you don't need to understand all the concepts, you can kind of just have these running in the background while you're doing dishes or folding laundry or making dinner or, you know, hanging out on the couch doing a cross, whatever, just to get it into your brain and create those pathways we talked about. Yeah, you can also go through the minor errors in old reports. If you're going in your student history, you can just select graded reports and then look for low scores to identify some of the reports that might be really good for review. And then, again, give yourself some rest. If you can, a night or two is going to really, really help your brain take all those bits of information and organize them and get rid of the fluff so that you can find it easier on your exam day. For proofreading, any grammar or punctuation errors I had went on a list with some BOSS references, Book of Style references that go along with them. So for hyphens, I have a full page of errors because I had a lot of those. And it took me a lot longer than I'd like to admit to realize that compounds had to be modifying something. So I really recommend putting the full sentence, because had I been doing this, I probably would have spotted that a little bit earlier. So yeah, this will create a nice list of things that you can look at a glance in your proofreading phase. One thing we see a lot as instructors is some grammar issues that have to do with parts of speech and agreement. So it can be a good idea to brush up on these subjects before test time. I'm going to put a link for that at the end. Because, you know, most of us get rusty with these subjects, so it's a good idea to do a little review for that. And finally, when it comes time to actually do your dictations, one of the things, we recommend the 3-pass method. I find it really helpful to start by listening to all the dictations. One thing I found really helpful is when I'm listening to them, identify the specialties involved with each report. So, you know, sensory, orthopedics, gastro, surgical. Sometimes it's going to be surgical gastro. You might have 2 specialties that apply. Identifying the specialty will really help you so that you can have some reference material on hand and even just scan through it to help prime yourself for that. So then you can take each report one by one, do a typing pass, followed by several proofreading passes. Yes, several. These reports are worth a lot of your mark. Depending on which exam you're taking, it's 2.5% to 6% of your final grade for each report. It's a lot. So what I like to do was go through and do a proofreading pass for abbreviations, a separate pass for medical terms, labs, all those forget-me-not lists that we just went through. Separate passes for those will really help you look, and spot anything that's out of place. Yeah, and then finally, you can go and do a last proofreading pass reading things out loud, because it is a lot easier to spot grammar mistakes if you do this. So just reading things out loud, you'll kind of be able to spot prepositions that don't belong there, or maybe you missed a verb and that needs to go back in. It just gets to be more obvious if you say things out loud, because I think something in our brain goes, oh, someone could hear me now, and we just perk up that extra 10% more. That extra 10% could be, make a huge difference. So here are some of the websites and webinars I think would be helpful. I'll take a look. I haven't seen a ton of questions so far, so hopefully that's due to my covering things and not you guys falling asleep. Okay, so questions from topics. They are spread out fairly evenly, and it will only be the specialties that you've covered so far in the course, but sometimes you will have to go outside of the course to search for some things, especially for Stedman's resources. For proofreading, I would say really focus on the dictations that have been graded, especially by the instructors, because that'll give you an idea of what we're looking for and make sure you really understand those expectations. And then from there, you can also go into your own graded reports and look over those to pick out errors from that. Sample reports, if you're looking at things like emptysamples.com, they're not always great because sometimes they contain formatting that we don't use. So you really, really want to look at what is actually, what has been formatted to our account specifics. Using the ebook for searching, sure. I have the BOSS pulled up. So let's say I'm trying to look for a hyphen with a range. You're going to get a list here, and I usually just scroll through and look for keywords like that. If you want to do a specific search term, you can do that, but it's not always going to get you to where you need to find things, so it might be easier to, use a couple terms and not do the specific. For speech recognition chapter, I don't know if you can go back and listen to those dictations. I'm not as familiar with MDAT, so I'll have to ask one of the other instructors. So I've only been on it a couple times. Thank you, Alicia. So for on exam today, that's an example of an introductory comma. We don't grade it, so put it in, take it off, doesn't matter. It'll show up as a difference if the answer key has it as something different, but it's not something that we're deducting marks for. Oh, is it not showing on the screen? Sorry, Tara. Let's see. Can you see the, oh, you can see it. Awesome. Okay, so, yeah. Hopefully, yeah, just to reiterate, you can use the search function here, type in keywords, and then you'll get a panel here that you can scroll through. I've probably used this search function so much that, Carolyn, it's kind of weird. If you can see my screen, you should be able to see it. So that's a bit odd. Kind of odd that some of you are seeing it and some are not. I'm not sure how I would fix that exactly. There might be something in your screen preferences or video settings, but if you can't see it, I'll just say when you're in the VitalSource book, there is a little sort of loop, magnifying glass, that symbol in the upper left-hand corner, and that you can use to enter search terms and get results, and we'll highlight it in the text. So when it comes to capitalizing mother, father, grandmother, etc., there is a BOSS rule that you want to capitalize family titles when they're followed by a personal name and when they stand alone. So if there is a pronoun along with it, like the patient's mother stays lowercase, but if you have a doctor say, mother brought the patient in today, or, after the surgery we told mother and father how it went, in those cases, they're kind of standing in for proper names, so you have to capitalize it then. Kind of a good sort of rule of thumb for capitalization is if it's standing in for a person, you want to kind of treat it as a proper noun. So does anyone have any other questions for the PIE in general? Okay, well, we're hitting the end here. As I said, I am going to post these with the actual video when it goes up on the forum. Did I still keep doing the 3-pass method after I graduated? Honestly, not for easy reports, but for tough ones, yes, because it does really help to go over, especially if anything came back to me from QA, quality assurance, I would go over that a few times to make sure I would just put it in my brain, really. It's the easiest way to explain that. So, yeah, honestly, while you're getting used to account specifics and punctuation and all the labs and meds, it is more like a 10-pass method, but it does get a lot quicker as you go along. Aside from name, place, date, sometimes I see physician instead of name, but yeah, those are the basic ones that you're going to see. You're welcome, guys. I think we're basically at the end of the presentation, so you're very welcome, everyone. I hope you guys feel a little bit better and about maybe having a plan for your exams. And just remember, you get a lot of practice, so don't stress out too much about them, and try and just identify those areas where you need a little extra help and review, and you got this. All right. It won't be as scary as it sounds. It might be a little bit stressful, but you guys can do it. All right, you're welcome, guys. I'm going to end it off now.